No mai, haere mai, you're very welcome to Waipapa Taumata Rau this evening to the second of our conversations. Some of you may have been in the event last week and you're welcome back. This is the second in a series that we're running and we'll be continuing to run into next year. And before we open up the floor to our moderator and the panel, just a few comments from me. And Michael set the scene beautifully because he talked about cybersecurity as the theme and the topic for the evening, but actually situated it in the context of conversation. And more broadly, our Taumata Rau Conversations are around establishing exactly that, opportunities to rehabilitate conversation and to find opportunities to disagree agreeably and to respond to provocations around some of the complex issues that we're facing. And so we're particularly starting with some of those concerns that are both personal and, of course, national. And so I'll just say a few words about that tonight, but really just to situate this particular panel in the context of the broader discussions that we're having around conversations that bring people together with differing views, differing opinions to learn from each other. It's actually the crucible of what a university is about. So tonight, as you've heard, we're talking about cybersecurity. And I thought I'd start with some provocative statements, given that that's where we are coming from. The original idea for this public discussion rests in our rapidly changing geopolitical environment. This arrived on our shores, and it arrived on these shores before I arrived on these shores at the start of the pandemic, 15th of March 2019, with the terrorist attack on the Christchurch Mosque. There was a Royal Commission that followed, as you know, and that challenged the government to develop a new conversation with New Zealanders about national security challenges and the ones that we face now and facing into. Now, perhaps national security in the past has been felt to be the concern of a small group of political officials who've worked behind the scenes. Citizens have gone about their duties and oblivious often to the risk that's around. Today, the government thinks differently. Officials need and want us to be concerned about this. It's the concern of all. This concern saw the government's National Security Group, located inside the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, produce the first national security strategy this year. That strategy, I'm sure you've had a look at it, tells us that we're exposed to global trends. We're also exposed to increasingly disrupted and contested worldviews with direct implications for us at home. We see this every day. This strategy calls on us to act early and work together. And it's important that we're having this discussion on a university campus, because it does seem to be that university campuses, of course, are places where we encounter this daily. 11 core national security issues are identified. Reviewing them alongside the 2023 National Security Public Survey is quite interesting. That survey is an insight into the way New Zealanders live and think about their lives in this context. Asked about the real threats they saw happening in the next 12 months in that survey, the top 3 listed were natural disasters, organised crime between New Zealand and another country, and hacking into information systems. It's this third concern that we're discussing today. It's live and it's personal for every one of us in this room, because of course we're all subject to that degree of hacking and intervention in our daily personal lives, as well as working in our institutions and across the nation. The newfound openness on the part of the government to security mirrors approaches by New Zealand's Five Eyes partners and comes at a time of growing geopolitical tensions. I don't think we can shy away from this in this context of this conversation. Cybersecurity means protecting people and their computers, and their post-it notes, Michael, and their Excel spreadsheets, networks, programs, and data from unauthorized access, from disruption, from exploitation, and/or modification. I add another question to that. Should we also be protecting people from themselves? As the strategy tells us, malicious cyber actors, including state and non-state actors, present a persistent threat to all New Zealanders, as well as New Zealand organisations like ours, businesses and government. And we've seen sustained attacks on New Zealand organisations recently. We might hear about some of that from the panel members. But tonight we'll hear that cyber risks are real and that the threats are constant. I observe that our panellists here tonight discuss threat and risk. The underbelly of this is fear. Fear serves many purposes. We know that in the flight and fight system. But fear is also used to control and coerce people. And so I leave you with those thoughts in this provocation. Leading our discussion tonight is moderator Tim McCready. He's a friend and alumni of the university. He's also a significant contributor to New Zealand's Story, a strategist and an insightful commentator on business and innovation. And I was assured a moment ago that he's got a great sense of humour. No pressure then, Tim. Thank you for joining us today, and over to you to introduce the panel. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Ina reo, iro rangatira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, Dawn, for that scene setting and for the introduction, and we'll see how we go with demonstrating my sense of humour throughout the course of the evening. I'm Tim McCready, and it's fantastic to be here to moderate the second in this Taumata Rau Conversation series here at Waipapa Taumata Rau, the University of Auckland. As Dawn said, these conversations have been designed to spark meaningful discussions from multiple perspectives on major issues that are affecting Aotearoa New Zealand. Last week, there was an excellent conversation about the future of New Zealand's health workforce, which was set at a perfect time right after the general election. This evening, we're going to explore New Zealand's national security and the very real risks and impacts that cyber threats have to our critical infrastructure. Things like our energy grids, our water supply, our transportation networks, public services, and communication systems. We know that there are hundreds of incidents every year in New Zealand from malicious cyber actors, including state and non-state actors, intending to disrupt essential services and cause widespread damage. One of the most prominent examples of this that I'm sure everyone is familiar with is the Waikato DHB attack a couple of years ago. For that, the attackers obtained sensitive information about staff and about patients, and they issued an ultimatum to the Waikato DHB to pay up, or else they would release that data. And they proved that they had the data by leaking some of that to several New Zealand media outlets. In response to all of that, the Waikato DHB disconnected disconnected their systems from the networks. All 5 hospitals that they're responsible for were disconnected, and doctors and nurses were having to use pen and paper to deal with patients. That had a huge impact on the health sector and, of course, the patients that really depended on that treatment. Have a think about what those kinds of attacks can have in other parts of New Zealand's critical infrastructure. So as Dawn mentioned, as part of our discussion today, we have a keynote speech from Tony Lynch, who is Deputy Chief Executive at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and he leads New Zealand's National Security Group. He will talk us through New Zealand's very first National Security Strategy, which was launched less than 3 months ago. And he'll tell us about how it came to be, why we have it, and what the next steps ahead are for that. Following that, we will have a panel discussion with some of New Zealand's most eminent players in the cybersecurity space to explore the risks and the potential impacts that modern threats pose to our critical infrastructure and solutions for a robust cybersecurity posture. For that, we do want this to be a discussion, so we will be taking questions from the audience, and if I flick over to the next slide here, we're using the Slido platform for that. So anyone that's not familiar with Slido, you can point your phone up there with your camera, head through to Slido and you'll be able to submit questions that I will put to the panel in the latter half of that panel discussion. So please do feel free to submit questions right from the start and we'll get to them a little bit later on. But for now, please do join me in welcoming Deputy Chief Executive Tony Lynch to the stage.
Thank you so much. It's just great to be here. What a warm welcome, and Dawn, thank you. You've stolen most of my thunder, but just a fantastic warm-up. I'm going to be responsible for the national security part of the conversation, but so looking forward to this conversation. So we'll just track through, and this is us, our New Zealand's first national security strategy. We're thrilled to be here, thrilled to be able to talk about the strategy. It's been a very long time coming. What I'm planning to do is talk about the drivers behind the strategy, a bit about how it was developed, and then talk about where it's landed on a number of issues, and hopefully set a context for a very important part of our national security, which is cyber security. So, why a strategy? And we heard from Dawn the context of the terrorist attack of 15 March 2019 and the context and our response to that attack. Our response as a society is very much at the heart of this work. Most will know a Royal Commission was established. It did its work over about 18 months, an 800-page report, 44 recommendations, and the government agreed to all of them in principle. And essentially what it gave us was a blueprint for change around national security. The Royal Commission pointed to the need for stronger government leadership and direction, for the national security community to get better at how it engages with the people it serves, and to support a public discourse about national security. And this really is very much at the heart of this response. So a very strong message in support of a national security strategy. A second driver, and we also heard about this, is our strategic environment. Complex, fast-changing, challenging. Once upon a time, we saw ourselves as immune from the threats, mainly due to our geographic distance. We also talked about a benign strategic environment, but the world has changed, and we are more connected to that world than ever before, and we'll hear more about that shortly. And that connection brings both opportunity but also vulnerability and exposure to threats. Threats to our physical and economic security, our political and social institutions. These threats are changing rapidly, and they span terrorism, violent extremism, strategic competition, foreign interference, cyber threats, disinformation, and more. And many of these threats are immediately impacting our communities. A third driver is New Zealand's a very proud member of the Pacific Islands Forum, and in 2018 the Boy Declaration was agreed by Forum members, and that encouraged, in the interests of transparency, each member to develop their own national security strategy. So quite prescient work by the Forum members, and particularly given the security challenges that we are seeing in the Pacific. Now, just to talk through a little bit around the audience and our stakeholders. So really three principal audiences for this work. And first of all, ministers and government, and this is around creating a framework to support decision making, placing our advice in clear context, providing a roadmap for difficult conversations, including resourcing and capability, and we're anticipating we'll have a number of those conversations in the months to come. And then a tool to talk about national security opportunities and challenges in a way that's appropriate to our New Zealand context. Then the second is the New Zealand public, and noting that one of our key vulnerabilities, as highlighted by the Royal Commission, was that New Zealand did not have a public discourse on national security, and we can talk to some of those dimensions as we go. So an intent to build transparency and participation in national security, helping New Zealanders to understand and feel prepared about the threats around us, underscoring the role that all New Zealanders can play. So talking whole of society, communities, iwi Māori, the private sector, academia, all as partners, and then also to provide clarity about how the national security community works. And then the third part of the audience is international partners, so clarifying expressions, talking about New Zealand's interests, our priorities, the policies that we take, identifying areas of mutual agreement and opportunity, as well as points of difference, and articulating in particular how we see our role in the Pacific. So multiple audiences for this strategy. How did we get to this strategy? So this outlines the process. I'm a public servant. We love process. So we essentially had two phases. There was a policy review and then the development of the strategy. And as you track from left to right, you can see the progress that was taken. The policy review culminated in a number of key decisions, agreement to develop a strategy and based on a set of national security strategic policy settings, vision, interests, principles and priorities. And I'll talk to those shortly. There was agreement to have a more focused concept of national security, and that's one based on protecting New Zealand from threats that would do us harm. So saying a more focused concept of national security, and that came very much from the Royal Commission. That directed us to focus on those threats that we can do something about and that we're best placed to manage. Alongside, the current all-of-government strategic crisis management system is still retained, and we also keep our national approach to risk, and that's risk across all hazards and all threats, so there's no change there. I mentioned a key element of the development process was public engagement, and this wasn't just about talking about a draft document, but actually engaging on key questions about the role of different parts of society and on what working together actually look like. And we had conversations large and small, and that was a critical part of developing the strategy, the draft, and also very much to say that it did influence the tone, the content, the substance of the strategy. So a really important and critical element. Now I mentioned, and I've just sort of talked to that in terms of what we heard from New Zealanders. So some of the changes there, transparency, accessibility, the intersect between domestic and international, and we'll come to that much more around the cyber. Concerns about mis and disinformation as well, and the importance of informing the public discussion. So in terms of the strategy, a vision of a secure and resilient New Zealand, one that's protected as a free, open and democratic society for future generations. And just to underline, the for future generations element came from the consultation, so this is looking out into the long term. We have an articulation and set out here for a very first time of New Zealand's national security interests. It's not that we didn't have these interests, but they'd never been set out before, and these are intended to be enduring. We also set out a set of national security priorities, core and connected issues, and a program of action. I'll talk to each of those elements shortly. Actually, sorry, I'll go back there. And just to say, a vision for national security on what our interests are. And this is intended to be a whole of society vision, so that's bringing together all those strands that can help protect our national security. And then our national security fundamentally about protecting New Zealand from threats to the interests which are spelt out. So our overarching vision is for a more secure and resilient New Zealand. And at the heart of this are three priorities, and they are to act early, to lead an integrated approach, and working together. And I wanted to emphasise the acting early element, which is really at the core of our strategy. And this is about being less reactive, more proactive. It's about having the ambition to prevent national security events from arising whenever possible. And I think we'll touch on these elements in the panel discussion. Acting early has 4 elements, and you'll see them there. So understanding, and this is to frame each of the core issues, which I'll come to shortly, but understanding, and not just about intelligence, but diverse sources of knowledge, and that's whether it's what communities tell us, what partners have told us about their concerns, what others are seeing. Preventing, which is the highest priority, and then preparing, which is about building resilience and readiness to respond when prevention is not possible. And again, we'll come to these elements when we talk about cyber security. Working together covers all these elements, and that's equally important, whether it's domestically or internationally. Again, bringing that whole of society approach together, as well as working with our Pacific partners and with our other international partners. The strategy distinguishes between core and connected issues. And the Vice Chancellor talked about core issues, so we've tried to sort of frame them here. I'll go in the next slide into more detail around the core issues, but basically these are the issues that most directly impact our national security interests, the main challenges that people working in national security deal with on a daily basis. And these span both drivers of insecurity, you'll see the drivers here, strategic competition, emerging critical and sensitive technology, the methods used by threat actors, so you see the methods here, disinformation, foreign interference and espionage, transnational organised crime, and terrorism and violent extremism. And then the domains that we're looking to protect. So economic security, Pacific resilience and security, maritime security, space security, border security, and of course, cyber security. And we do expect that these core issues will change over time. And I can say, had we managed to land a national security strategy, say 5 or 10 years ago, we mightn't have had disinformation there. We might well not have had space security there. So these are evolving over time. So just to emphasise, interests intended to be enduring, but these core issues will, we are anticipating change over time. And then we have a set of connected issues as well. And these are broader drivers of insecurity. So a set of issues that may have national security implications, and that's often through their scale or magnitude, issues where other sectors have their lead, but the national security community needs to establish close connections. So classic examples of those, and you'll see them there on the right. So climate change, social instability, economic inequality, debt and corruption, biosecurity and human health. And I can tell you, when we first presented the draft of the core issues to our ministers, one immediately came in and said, what does this mean for climate change? So we've looked to frame where climate change sits. Climate change, not a national security issue, but a connected issue that impacts all that is happening with those core issues. So again, just sort of building for our panel discussion, 2 areas of particular relevance, cybersecurity and also emerging critical and sensitive technology. So here's a bit more detail on the 12 core issues, and I can come back to those later on if you would like. And we'll just move through. So a strategy needs a program of action, it needs a work program to deliver on the actions, to be able to take at a system level a set of actions to give effect to the strategy, and particularly that element around acting early. And there we are. So to conclude, and I was on a tight time frame, so I hope I've kept to the Tim's orders, but just fantastic to be here, to be able to present in a little bit of a Reader's Digest, but a very brief encapsulation of our national security strategy. Please go to the website, please look at it. We are so thrilled to be a part of a conversation and a discussion on national security, and so grateful to Auckland University for hosting this event. This is a part of what we had intended with the strategy. We're thrilled to be a part of this. In the end, a message: the better informed we are, the better the decisions we can make about our safety and security, and that encapsulates all that is national security. So tēnā koutou katoa, thank you everyone.
Now, because we've got, as I mentioned, some of New Zealand's top cybersecurity experts in the room, I'm not going to try and introduce what they do for a living. I would much rather that they do that. And so to get into things right away, I'll briefly introduce each panellist and ask them to tell us a little bit about some of the work that they do as it relates to cybersecurity. So perhaps we might start with Lisa Fong, who is Deputy Director General at the National Cybersecurity Centre within the GCSB. Lisa, could you briefly tell us about the NCSC's role and what it's working on in the current threat landscape?
Yeah, sure, Tim. Kia ora, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So the National Cybersecurity Centre is a part of the Government Communications Security Bureau. So we use intelligence and classified capability to provide cybersecurity services that aren't part of a commercial offering. We have focused traditionally on nationally significant organisations, so relevant to this conversation, critical infrastructure, but equally other sectors across the public and private domains who, if impacted by a major cyber event, would have consequences for the prosperity and well-being of New Zealand. In terms of our service offering, we have provided advice and guidance to these sectors. We provide this publicly as well as in classified form through things like technical security information exchanges. We also have a role in a range of regulatory systems, ranging from public network operators through to outer space and high altitude, as well as overseas investment and radio communication spectrum licensing. We do frontline service delivery in terms of detection and disruption, so we're looking for national level harm, really. So what's a high impact threat, or where might state-sponsored actors be operating? Our detection capabilities are for both the public and private sector, again across that nationally significant organisational set, but equally when it comes down to brass tacks, if we're unable to disrupt in time, we do have an incident response capability who will come in and provide over-the-top services, particularly focused on forensic analysis, which is kind of our key specialisation. We also, in the event of Waikato District Health Board and other incidents rated about C2 or above in terms of the categorisation matrix we operate to. I also have a role in the national security system that Tony chairs, so the ODISC system you may have heard about. So that is initiated when events or activities that are happening affecting New Zealand are escalated into a national security setting as well. Finally, with talking about the sort of broader system setting, we work really closely with DIA, who's lead on scams and online harm, so digital content, equally with police over cybercrime, and of course the National Cyber Policy Office, part of Tony's area, and we have worked really closely with REANZ over the years. We have changed our focus to be across the wider economy recently, so we've had the CERT function transferred to us from another government agency. This means that we'll be able to provide a fuller service offering across small to medium-sized enterprise and individuals, and hope to provide more authoritative advice in the future as a result.
Brilliant, fantastic. Okay, now I'll introduce Amber McEwen, who is the Chief Executive of the Research Education Advanced Network New Zealand, which from now on we'll call REANZ. And REANZ is a Crown-owned membership organisation. Could you explain a little bit about how it fits into this landscape?
Absolutely, because I'm sure the majority of you will have no idea of RIANZ or have heard of us, because we are a behind-the-scenes infrastructure provider. We're New Zealand's National Research and Education Network, or NREN. We're part of a group of 122 NRENs that are around the world, and we work globally to enable global research and education collaborations to happen in as seamless a manner as possible. So there's two ways we do that. The first and foremost is we run a high-speed data network, and that network is configured in exactly the same way across all 122 countries. Our members pay us to keep that network empty, which is counterintuitive from an infrastructure perspective, but that allows these big data sets to flow seamlessly from one side of the globe to the other. So if you think of NIWA do a lot of climate modelling for New Zealand, which you'll be aware, we'll have all seen their forecasts and their predictions. They send a lot of that data to Europe, where it goes into global climate change models that are used for researchers trying to understand the future of this planet and the climate changes that we can expect. So we enable that. The other thing is we enable tools that support collaboration globally. So many of you, I hope, at Auckland University know Eduroam, the federated Wi-Fi solution. We run that for New Zealand. That is run and offered over 122 countries globally as well, and that enables you to roam seamlessly at Oxford University, at Harvard in the US, or wherever you want. So that's what we do from a standard offering. And over the last few years, probably 2 or 3, members have asked us to look more into security. So we do 3 things in the security arena at the moment. One is we work globally to secure the network by common architecture standards and routing security protocols. So that's sort of like the lowest common denominator type approach. Then in country, we ask our members what they want us to do. So we've got a couple of things that we're working on at the moment. One is the common plea from our members is to stop malicious traffic hitting their firewalls, please. Our members go from large institutions like Auckland University down to your small research organisation that might have 10 researchers and no IT professional. So they want us to make things easier for them on the ground. Then we also are part of this global community, and there's a Five Eye Alliance building within it. And what we do is we share threat intelligence across the Five Eyes. So if there is an attack on an UK university, for example, then the other 4 Five Eyes are notified immediately. When it's resolved, the playbook is shared and the mitigations are shared. And that allows us, well, it will, over time, to share it with our members so we can really strengthen and lift the whole ecosystem. So that's really what we're about.
Brilliant, great. Okay, we'll dive into some more of that soon. But finally, I'd like to introduce Professor Giovanni Rossello, who is Professor here at the University of Auckland and also the head of the School of Computer Science. Can you tell us a little bit about how the University of Auckland fits into the wider cybersecurity landscape in New Zealand and beyond?
Yeah, okay. So there are several, let's say, activities that we are running, or we have like centers. One is specifically working on cybersecurity. So where we try to bring people from different type of backgrounds together, to talk and coordinate activities around cybersecurity. Situation is not really that brilliant at the moment, because if you look also across the country, there are not many people in cybersecurity in the academia left, mainly because of lack of resources, and people have been kind of moving overseas. So if you consider people that really do cybersecurity, there are maybe 3.5 in the country, and the half is because that person does a lot of other things as well. So, I mean, you try to do the best that you can with your PhDs, and also try to kind of teach new students through some of the programs that we have. But I would say that a lot of focus at the moment is versus AI and machine learning. So cybersecurity is always thought as something that you can add later on. So first, basically, let's have something or someone break through, and then we need to fix it. So let's call the cybersecurity expert and let's try whether we can fix it. So situation is, as I say, not really kind of where we should be, let's say. I mean, as a country with the 5 million people that really want to be at the cutting edge of technology. But yeah, so this is what we're doing and what we're trying to do at the university.
Fantastic, great. Okay, well, we might open up to the wider sort of panel discussion now, and I guess we're here to talk about New Zealand's critical infrastructure. And I wonder, we've seen a lot of attacks recently. We've had, I mentioned the Waikato DHB attack. Auckland Transport suffered a ransomware attack earlier this year. AUT University had an attack last month. What are some of the parts of critical infrastructure in New Zealand that you're most worried about? What's the top of your worry list when it comes to threats in New Zealand? And perhaps, Tony, I might bring in you and get you to go first.
No, thank you, Tim. My team had challenged me to use the word polycrisis, and so I'll be able to get that in very early. But there are multiple challenges, as you say. The particular piece we're worried about in terms of critical infrastructure is the interconnectedness of critical infrastructure these days in a way that has never been recognised before. And so where you have a weakness, that can impact right across the system. And the classic example for us, which was very compelling at a political level, I can say, not least, was Cyclone Gabrielle. And if you have a power station built on a floodplain that gets knocked out, it takes out then communications, which means that responders are not able to respond, which means that also another impact was that ATM machines were not working, and just knock on impacts. And if you go to each of those sectors, they might say, we are fine with critical infrastructure, we're looking after ourselves, but there isn't the information sharing across those different sectors, and if there is weakness in one point, it can impact others along the way. So what we've been looking to do is really to build something that's much more of a system approach, and it's a work in progress, but Cyclone Gabrielle, horrific as that was and such an impact on our country, but a real compelling message that we have to do something different.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, Lisa, jump in.
I like polycrisis. It's like a rebrand of my to-do list. Look, what would I say? So echoing the context in which the National Security Strategy was developed, geostrategic challenges are playing out regionally and domestically. Equally, technology is rapidly changing, and that presents opportunity. It also represents vulnerability, and critical infrastructure operators are having to grapple with this environment all the time. So I'm not going to pick one thing. I'm going to pick three things, and plus a sort of illustrative example. So I would say, distilled out of Cyclone Gabrielle and other things, it's really highlighted how dependent we are on our digital supply chain, both globally and domestically. And if we are unable to assure ourselves about the resilience of our digital supply chain, then we are in strife. And at present, our regulatory models are focused on specific sectors and is unable to look at that interconnectedness of critical infrastructure providers. Secondly, our physical infrastructure and our digital infrastructure is increasingly connected, and that's quite a mind shift for OT operators. So operating systems, OT, connected to information systems or IT, which are traditionally internet facing, means that there's a greater threatscape or threat attack surface, right word, attack surface for threat actors to exploit. And that presents enormous challenges given the impact of small vulnerabilities. And that takes me to the third point, which Tony's already beautifully illustrated. We are so interconnected between our critical infrastructure providers and their supply chains. It means that a weakness anywhere in the system is a vulnerability for everybody, and the impacts can scale really rapidly. And we've had multiple examples of that already this evening. What's really important to keep in mind is that the impact is not always visible, and this is the illustrative example I'd like to draw out. And that's, earlier this year, with international partners, we released Living Off the Land, which is an advisory highlighting the People's Republic of China's activity against critical national infrastructure in other nations, using major global suppliers, using techniques that are not easily detected, even by sophisticated operators. This is an illustration of the urgency of resilience efforts. Often we wait for incidents before something happens. Let's not wait. Let's take this as an example and a lesson in advance.
Yeah. Amber, if you can add to that.
Ditto. Yeah. I think a slightly different lens from the world I exist in, which is about fostering collaboration. So as a global community, we've had to address concerns this year about Russia and Afghanistan, and at what point do we stop collaboration with scientists and researchers in those countries? That's been a big debate for us. It's a slightly different lens, and we've sort of come to the point where we keep collaboration going, but we pull off research programs where necessary. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, we didn't, but our European colleagues stopped connecting the Russian scientists to the Hadron Collider studies because that could be weaponized. And then it was obviously followed by EU sanctions, so the decision was made for us. Yeah. So there's a real interest about conversation about how this sort of connectivity continues in this geopolitical environment. The other conversation that we're having quite a lot with our members is that back to the stop the malicious actors hitting our firewalls. How far do we lock down these networks and we stop that free flow of information? And that's the other thing, is you can go too far and then you end up with the Great New Zealand Firewall, and we've heard of the Great China Firewall, right? And these are the debates that we're having across the sector from my perspective. So not so much about the physical infrastructure, but how much you lock down and you stop connectivity.
Yeah, great. And Giovanni, what would you add from your perspective here at the university?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's the perspective from the university, that's my perspective, I would say. But, I mean, yeah, I think that they've already covered most of the issues here. What I would say is, being a small country, I think one of the issue that we might have is that, creating that reliability, you need to have basically fail-safe and having also multiple infrastructure that could take over from other parts, right, when it gets hit by something. And yeah, I mean, we need to to try to find the right balance where we can optimize and where we invest the resources, because sometimes I can see that we get a bit distracted with things maybe happening overseas and we are not even there yet, quantum computing being one, for instance. So it would be really good that at least we could have a good foundation here in New Zealand, then we'll see what we could build on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the last Taumata Rau conversation was about healthcare, and I think when I think back to the election campaign that we've just sort of all suffered through, health was one of the conversations that people were talking about. The other things that we were talking about, of course, were cost of living, crime. But I can't think of a situation where we were talking about national security, let alone cybersecurity within that campaign. Do you think, and I predict that I know what your answer to this will be, but do you think as a country we're talking about cybersecurity and the risks to national security enough? Who'd like to go first?
Maybe I can jump in. I mean, this was an absolutely key message out of the Royal Commission report, that we don't have a national discourse around the range of threats that we have, and in the Royal Commission's case around terrorism and violent extremism, and that we are vulnerable because we're not having that conversation. So again, it's one of the elements to try and distill just why is it. Are New Zealanders allergic to talking about national security or cyber security or the likes? Dawn, the Vice-Chancellor, mentioned a national security survey that we ran 2 years ago. We're just about to start the third one. And that was incredibly compelling because it gave a very clear message that there is an appetite to talk about national security, but not least that government has not been good at articulating or spelling out those issues. And so the challenge from the Royal Commission report, reinforced by the survey, was to say we need the sorts of conversations that we're having now. We have a very thin layer of, if you could put it, the commentariat. You know, if you think academics, commentators and the likes, think tanks, relative to other countries, and I think that is something that is a challenge to us as well. But, you know, to reinforce, we need that wider discourse. And one of the reasons we need that wider discourse is because a lot of the issues that we're trying to address need whole of society approaches. So it's not just a government agency, it's not just academia, it's not just the private sector or communities or iwi Māori or the like, but actually coming together to respond, whether it's disinformation, whether it's cyber, the range of other threats. We need to build that. So that's a real challenge. I think it's a fantastic, exciting opportunity. We have been told that there is an appetite on the part of New Zealanders to do so, and so part of our task, within my department, we're looking to really sort of lift and build that conversation.
And to the rest of the panel, do you see that flow through to sort of general society in New Zealand? Do you think compared to other parts of the world, are we sort of less fluent as a society in terms of being secure when it comes to cybersecurity?
So personal experience, having engaged with a lot of boards, is that there is a leaning back from the table when it comes to IT, and that becomes a barrier to communication. So it's not so much cybersecurity as the way in which we're framing how we engage with cybersecurity. It is not an IT problem. It is a strategic issue. It is not something that you tack on in your risk register, and that's your point, Giovanni, about the add-on or the sort of afterthought. In order to operate in a technology-enabled future or present, you have to think about your IT domain in the same way that you would about your financial. It's just living and breathing. It's strategically connected to what you do. Why you would sell yourself short, I don't know why. Look, plenty of chat, plenty of cyber dazzle, but actually, how do you make that work for you? How do you action it within your organisation?
And from a systems perspective, in terms of thinking about New Zealand's critical infrastructure, how robust do you feel like that is? We've talked about resilience. Do you think that New Zealand's critical infrastructure is in a good place to be resilient to attacks?
I mean, if you look for what happened at IT, I mean, that's a result of what's going on, right?
Sure.
I mean, I mean, when you talk about security or cybersecurity, I mean, it's always like a moving window or a sliding window. So you are in a space and a time where, yes, you can be secure, but then, you know, you patch your system, you bring a new piece of software or a new piece of equipment, and you're gonna open up the door for new vulnerability. So it's a constant kind of effort that you have to solve. Maybe, in this minute, it could be a case that we have current infrastructure is safe. Next minute, it might not be, because things change very quickly, right? So, and where the most difficult part about cybersecurity comes in is that you need to constantly keep it up, which means also putting a lot of resources. So coming back, the point that Tony was making, about, creating these discourse-heavy people from different, from government, academia, coming together discussing. How much resources, how much dollars figure can you put behind that kind of activities? Because, we have been trying to engage multiple times. There is a lot of, common ground that we could share and talk about. But then, after that hour in whatever office this happened, we go back to our busy life. So if we don't have resources where we buy people time out, to work on these kind of activities, like informing the public or working on cybersecurity, it's not going to happen. So that's where I think proper investment would help.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think resourcing is the challenge. Because, as you said, Giovanni, the bar's being lifted constantly.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges we have is we're a long, lumpy motu, right? So infrastructure is expensive. And I like to think, I lived in the UK for many years, and New Zealand's, so the size of New Zealand's roughly the size of the UK. The UK has 32 million taxpayers. New Zealand's got about 3.4 million. So we have to be really clever in where we decide to invest. We can't do it all, and we can't do it all the time. And I think that's the debate, that's the challenge, is what are those few things that we will do that will actually make a material difference?
I wonder if I may, one of the challenges, you can invest all you like, but if you've got a third-party supplier that is weak, then you run a risk. So that's why I go to the point around you have to think more broadly and have to work, across the system and think in a system way, think about networks and those connections. And if nothing else, and it may not be necessarily investment, but it's about information sharing, so that if you know that someone that you're working with is underinvesting in their resilience for whatever business reason, you then can make your informed decision about how you manage that. So I think that's so the information sharing and that recognising the connective tissue, I think, is absolutely critical.
And building on all of this role and responsibility too, so you can't load onto each individual organisation all of the total cost of security, I suppose. And what I mean by that is we have a small economy, we have a really tight workforce, and we're a net technology taker. So we don't have a lot of control over our digital supply chain. And this means that it's really important that we try and alleviate the need for expertise. So how is it we build into our procurement and contracting models, particularly the larger institutional players who have sway over wide sectors of New Zealand's economy, the ability to consume actually pre-assured digital supply. Equally, how is it that we make sure that we're having the right discussions within government to leverage our massive ability to contract and procure to secure that sensitive health data, or to make sure that, as part of that almost digital supply chain, we're also being responsible. So we have to bring into play all of the different roles and responsibilities within our system.
Lisa, I might carry on with a question for you, because I was looking at the National Cybersecurity Centre's data that you put out, and in the 2021-2022 year, you reported that there were 350 cybersecurity incidents recorded that affected nationally significant organisations, and that number, 350, is down from 404 in the year prior. So are our cyber attacks coming down, or perhaps are we not necessarily getting reports of everything that's happening?
It's a really tricky number to keep putting out each year, because it's not possible to track what's impacted. I'd love to say that it's the provision of services by the National Cybersecurity Centre. But look, I think larger institutions and critical infrastructure are getting more sophisticated at continuous service delivery, even in the event of incidents. So we are building our maturity and capacity to continue even in the event of major cyber threats. So that might be a factor. I also think, as that report assesses, that the impact on the threat landscape of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has drawn attention away from the kinds of activities that might have had effect here. And largely we are affected by sort of wide-scale attacks on vulnerabilities across global supply chains. So there's not necessarily intent towards New Zealand, we just end up swept up in these kinds of attacks, and with that redirected effort, there's been a sort of easing of that pressure. But really hard to interpret. Number going down isn't necessarily good, right? It may reflect a sort of a loss of sort of interest in reporting. It may reflect increase in capacity internally, not clear.
Yeah. Right, so we've heard just how important cybersecurity is, particularly when it comes to critical infrastructure, the public sector. Giovanni, what about the private sector? New Zealand is a country that's made up of, our businesses, small and medium enterprises. I think 97% of our businesses are those small companies that have 20 or fewer people. How well prepared are they in this area?
Well, I don't think they're well prepared, and these are, I think, something that maybe I addressed when we were at Macy or during my one of my lectures that I had recently. So The main problem is if you have 20 people and you are basically try to, starting a new venture, you try to go to invest these 20 people in what is your product, right? Then you might think about cybersecurity later on. And the main reason for that is because cybersecurity, if you have to bring an expert in, is going to be very expensive. And again, it's not like a feature that you can sell in your product, especially if it's something new. And so this maybe can be related to something that we're going to discuss later on. One of the ideas that we are trying to work here with some of my PhDs around maybe let's use AI and machine learning. So normally what happens is that companies, to try to see whether the infrastructure is up to scratch, what they do, they kind of bring someone externally and do a penetration test. So basically you have a bunch of people that come in and they start using vulnerabilities, already known vulnerabilities within your infrastructure to see whether your system is patched and up to scratch. The main problem is that, again, as I was saying before, you install a new patch or you install a new piece of software, all that work that has been done that is very expensive actually goes down out of the window because your configuration has changed and that new piece of software might have a vulnerability that nobody knows yet. 0 days exploit, they're called. And so one of the things that we're trying to work is, okay, so if you have a machine actually doing most of that work, so learning about, for instance, the new vulnerabilities or deploy existing one and learning about news, then basically an SME could buy this service from anybody. I mean, it would be just a piece of software agent that you launch in your system that continuously checking for new vulnerabilities. And if you bring in something new in your infrastructure, those agents will keep looking for something malicious. Of course, it can be used from bad guys as well, but at least you are employing it for try to kind of protect your infrastructure. So given that we are a country with the limited resources, we need to try to be smarter than others. And this could be a nice way of also exporting this technology to other countries, because it's not only New Zealand that has 90% of SMEs. No. I mean, most of the countries out there have SME as the core feature, and they are very exposed to these kind of issues. And by the way, once you get attacked and the attack is successful, 60% of those companies, SMEs, don't have the resources to come back to market. So they basically disappear.
Yeah. Let alone the reputational risk.
And that's it's going to be one of the damage why the reason why they don't come back, right? And also the other thing about data, once your data is gone, you can someone has made a digital copy, so the data is not coming back to you, no matter how much you pay, no matter what you do. So that data is out there in the public, you can assume.
Yep. Okay, well, since you've gone ahead and you've mentioned AI and machine learning, I'm gonna ask one last question before moving across to some.
I hate talking about machine learning, AI, and computer for cybersecurity, but yeah, you can.
But clearly, AI does have its potential benefits when it comes to protecting organizations, but also it can be used by bad actors to try and circumnavigate those things, right? So just a quick, I'll whip through the whole panel here, but a quick question: where do you sit on that on AI? Are you an optimist in terms of what it might do for cybersecurity, or a pessimist? You can go first.
So if you work in cybersecurity, you cannot be an optimist, man. So
okay.
So otherwise, you have to change the line of job. But yeah, I think that I'm more on the pessimistic side, because I think bad guys usually have more resources than good guys. And the more resources you have, the bigger your model, the smarter your model. So that's where I'm sitting at the moment.
We can hardly come in and say you're an optimist now, can you? Or are you?
Well, I actually can. So I was having this discussion because I think, I'm sitting on the fence, to be brutally honest, but which is the wrong place to be. But I actually think the investment in the commercial sector will slowly catch up and overtake the bad guys. But I think we can't be complacent. But I'm a natural optimist, so.
How about you, Lisa?
Oh, I'm a bit shruggy. So large language models, rate of change, maybe fine, whatever. Actually, what you need to think about is, ordinary organisations' inability to predict some of the privacy impacts or the potential for exploitation of these kinds of technologies, and to think about how standard governance procedures can help build your resilience and confidence to invest and take advantage of the opportunity of emerging technology. So, how are you securing your use of emerging tech like AI, and how are you keeping eyes on your procurement and contracting?
Yeah, nice. Tony?
Normally in the national security business, you're glass half empty people, but AI is a reality. I don't see it as the apocalyptic piece that is being built, but it may well prove to be as significant as the development of the internet down the track. To reflect, and again, as a public servant, our real challenge in this space is, do we have the policy settings, do we have the regulatory settings to keep up with what's happening? So the pace of development and evolution is so fast, and this is the sort of catch-up game. So that's where I do worry, and that's again, message around whole of society approaches. So governments have to work with businesses, the businesses that are involved in this area, so that we get the appropriate balancing act. It's going to need a balancing act. There is always risk, there's always opportunity, and where that lands needs a proper public policy framework around that, and that's our challenge at the moment.
Yeah, I don't see this as like, I agree with Tony, it's just another piece of technology, but as any other technology that is disruptive, is also kind of introduced like a scale. So if you think internet, then, when we start communicating with a lot of people, exchange ideas, then social media as well, you can reach a huge amount of people, creating your own kind of echo chamber, whatnot. With AI, again, it's about scale, because now instead of having, for instance, I'm working on some phishing, right? Yeah. Instead of having someone there replying with some victim, I'm Prince X and trying to do, now you launch bots and they can do this for you. And then when you see that there's someone that basically got phished, then can report back and in case pass to a human, right? Yeah. So basically AI or machine learning is kind of enabling people to have a more sophisticated and large-scale attacks.
Yeah,
right?
And shortcut what they were doing previously, right?
Yeah, as well.
Okay, there's quite a lot of questions that have come in on Slido. Unsurprisingly, there's quite a lot on generative AI, but I might stick to this question here that's come in that says, in general, why are there so few cybersecurity roles compared to other software-related roles? Why is cybersecurity in New Zealand not a big industry as it should be?
Please apply.
Well, what are you hiring?
For everything.
Yeah, for everything.
Where are these people who are claiming there's no cybersecurity roles? I don't know. I see enormous growth in the market and way more demand than there is supply. So seriously, everyone's looking, and there are some fantastic, sorry to shill my wares here, but for the whole industry's good, looking for people from every stage of life, mid-career change, as well as grads, to support the need within New Zealand. And that's been particularly acute post-COVID.
Okay, so maybe,
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen, I agree. So there's a shortage of people, especially because I think if you are in the cybersecurity room, James can attest here, that basically what happens is that you are under a lot of stress, right? So people get to burn out, especially during COVID. I think we saw a lot of people leaving these roles. So, and then you need to kind of hiring these people. But usually you don't go for people. You're not an expert. We do an internship, and now we bring you up to scratch. You are trying to look for people with 10, 20 years of experience, right? Which basically we don't have here. So what you do, you try to bring it from overseas. So one of the things that I think we should invest more in the country is to create that pipeline of people. And you don't need a degree. You don't need like a degree from the University of Auckland. But, one from here would be better. But so, you can come from, you can learn this stuff by yourself as well, right? But then you need to be placed in an environment where you have to touch the real systems and see how you can break them and bring it back to to where they need to be, right? So that's how you can kind of becoming an expert. And these are the kind of people that they are looking for. We are looking for more normal people with less experience.
Giovanni, I hope that you still have a job at the end of this this panel discussion.
I mean, they are hiring over there, so.
Well, I might stay on that topic though, actually, and just see what the rest of the panel has to say in terms of upskilling in New Zealand. What areas do you think we should be focused on? What could we do more of to make sure we do build that pipeline of talent that we need, and also the diversity of talent? Amber,
So one of the challenges we're seeing a lot of demand as well from across our members, but one of the things we're also hearing a lot about is the wellness concerns with people in that industry. We referenced high stress, burnout, people leaving the career. So I think to build the talent, you've got to make it an attractive place to work, and that's not just an intellectually interesting place to work, which it is. It's actually support people and give them the resources they need to be able to thrive in that environment. And I'm hearing stories, particularly from overseas, where people are just getting burnt out and leaving the sector. And then in terms of diversity, I think it's just making an effort to reach people younger. We've got my head of network operations is a woman from India, and she's the only woman in the network operations team. And I sort of said to her, well, what drew you to network operations? She goes, in my class in India, it was 50% woman, 50% man, because it was the people who had the right intelligence and wanted to get ahead, and that was driving it. So it's how we create those opportunities and lean into people when they're young at school, basically.
Lisa, how about you? What more could we be doing?
I would echo Amber's comments. So for me, even if we take the pipeline that comes out of tertiary institutions, it's the input, it's the in-pipeline we should be worried about, and ensuring that there's a diverse range of young students who are welcomed from a very early age into the range of different technical professions. God, it sounds really... school is not just a feeder for career paths and my job advertisements, but, making sure that a wide range of people feel welcome in the study and in the profession that follows. I know that in particular operational roles are really hard to stay in if you have demands on the home front, and so those pressures become sort of pragmatic off-ramps as well. So agree again, we need to look at how we're enabling people to remain in the profession.
Yeah, would you?
This is probably not what you want, but absolute consensus in terms of, if you're thinking pipeline, it's cyber literacy in schools, and so there are a number of programs, a number of initiatives. Australia had a very successful program that we've looked to import and to bring into some of our schools, but that's where we have to start, and this is the world ahead of us. So if you've got a narrow pool going in, we're going to struggle. We know there are big gaps in the workforce, and that, the result of that is we are not as well served as we could be or should be. So investing up front, and particularly in that education piece, is critical.
Yeah, great.
Plus, it's not, the other thing I was thinking as well is once you have the pipeline, you have to make sure so that they stay. And one of the main problems is that, overseas, better salaries, maybe better environment where to work. So if we get to the point where we just create a pipeline and then someone else is going to take advantage of our people, it's not going to fly. So you need also to have a proper environment where they can, grow professionally and feel also appreciated.
Yeah, great. Lots of good advice in there. There's a ton of great questions that have come through on Slido. I might ask this one next. Can we use the geographic isolation as New Zealand as an advantage to make a national security plan for us, particularly for overseas cyber attacks?
Yeah, cut all the cables and then you have the most secure systems in the world. But when you were talking about when the cyclone came and, the cell were down, right? That's the most perfect secure system that you can have. If it's usable, I don't know, but from a cybersecurity perspective, it's the best security that you can have.
Anyone want to disagree with that?
You can try.
If I may, geographic isolation, New Zealanders thought that terrorism was something that happened overseas, or if it happened to New Zealanders, it was because they were somewhere else. And March 15, 2019 was such a shock to our society, to our country, but it was a graphic and horrific reminder that, there are a host of threats and issues that know no boundary, and cyber is absolutely a part of that. Disinformation is another issue where it may well be, whether it's cyber disinformation. New Zealand does not have to be targeted to be impacted by this. So we do not have borders for many of these issues. Transnational organised crime, and Dawn talked about the stats, and number 2 concern in our last survey, after that the hacking into information systems, but transnational organised crime, a serious issue for New Zealanders. We are connected in the globe in a way that we have never been before. That, as said, presents enormous opportunity for us. We are traders, we are connected to the world. We are richer for it, but it brings those threats to us as well.
And clearly we're not going to cut that Southern Cross cable, right, that connects us to the world. And I think
the Russian will do for you.
I think this has been touched on a little bit, but from each of your perspective, are we working closely enough with our international partners? Do you think we should or could do more? And as people are, as countries are starting to, move more towards protectionism, is that causing a challenge as well in the areas that you're working on? You go first. You've already jumped in.
Yeah, so maybe there is a bit of optimism at the bottom of me, but so with the horizon opportunities that we can collaborate more with the European partners, I think that there is some opportunity there. Mm-hmm. Locally it's really bad. If you look, one of the main major opportunity for us to get the grants in New Zealand is through MB Endeavour funding. If you look in the last 3 years of funding, cybersecurity grants 0. So, and maybe are we so bad compared to the others? I'm not really sure. So having this opportunity of collaborating with others, especially when we can go and get also some funding, I think would be really, really useful. And Australia also could be a good partner for us as well. So Singapore, another one. So yeah, I can see that there are a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, sure. How about you, Amber? You mentioned that you are already, do have these relationships with international partners.
Yeah, and it's strengthening. I think as we get the geopolitical uncertainties happening, you see groups forming within the global community with which we work. So the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, that's caused a subset of NRENs to get together and look at opening up new undersea cable paths. The Five Eyes threat sharing that I mentioned earlier. So actually, because we're about facilitating collaboration, right? So our conversations about how we make that work and we change our shape to reflect the geopolitical realities. So yeah, we're doing a lot.
Yeah. Anything else to add?
I think people should be reassured that we are experiencing the same themes and issues as much larger partners at a different scale. And the challenge for New Zealand as ever is being really highly prioritised in what advantage we take from those relationships. It is so easy to get lost in those much, much larger institutions and much larger nations' sort of strategic priorities. It's important to remain focused on what's going to make the most difference to New Zealand. I think what we can also leverage, which is quite different from our partners too, and we should value and foster this, is we can be across our small economy in ways that much larger partners can't, and that's something which means that we can scale defences in a way that other partners struggle to.
Yeah.
Just absolutely to endorse, we're connected as we never have been before. I just maybe flip it a little bit, a sort of sense of, cyber partnerships, bigger partners, bigger. If you think of the challenges we have in New Zealand, look at our Pacific partners and think of their capability challenges and resourcing challenges and the likes. And we are working very closely with Pacific partners, not just on cyber, but across a range of areas. And some of Lisa's areas have very good connections, and building strength around the communities around our region are so critical. So bringing our lessons, and we do have lessons to bring. We have, we've got technologies, we've got practice, we are doing things post the Royal Commission, for example, that others are looking to us, but a really strong tie into the Pacific. So again, working with partners, understanding their priorities and focus and their challenges, and working as a team, working collaboratively.
Yeah, great. I'll take another Slido question. I'm going to take this one because it's from someone that's actually put their name to the question, which is a bit of a novelty. Nasir from the Electricity Authority has said, what is the best approach for New Zealand? Standards and policy-based approach which has cost implications and monitoring compliance, or guidelines-based at this stage?
Maybe if I could start, I mean, traditionally, New Zealand has been guidance and practice and principles, and I was a part of CER, Trans-Tasman discussions around, business law harmonisation. The Australian sort of legislation's yay thick, ours is like this because we have a principled approach. I think what we're finding though with critical infrastructure is that there are real challenges now, and so we're needing to think about whether we do have minimum standards, mandatory reporting and the likes, because there is clearly a market failure where you're getting chronic underreporting. We don't have companies following even most basic hygiene and minimum standards, and so how do we shift that? Now that may be an education piece moving to a more regulatory approach, but the world we're in now, it feels like that is the direction we're having to go. So that's quite a challenge for New Zealand against our traditional piece. But again, that message, if you keep doing the same things and not seeing a change, why do you keep doing the same things?
But, we're already doing it for personal safety, right? Each organization, I'm responsible if something happens to someone in my school, I'm responsible for that person, right? Even like, going to court, for instance, right? So we don't have that kind of regulatory system here when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think, we are ready for that kind of piece. Because, the guidelines, they're out there already, everybody knows about it. I think we need to kind of step it up a bit. And as we've done with the safety, I think we can do with the cybersecurity.
They speak to two quite different cultural approaches, and I think being too black and white about what's right, you end up missing the point, which is there's no nailing this with silver bullets, although I love the idea of unplugging. Fantastic. That might be the silver bullet. So I think it's important to recognise that a compliance-based approach checklist will not get you the culture or the principle-based understanding that you need to really carry your security. Yeah.
We've probably got time for one last question from Slido. There's a question here. What are your organisation's plans and strategies to get the public informed and aware of cyber threats, especially for those that are not technology savvy? I think we've all spoken about the need to upskill society. What are each of you doing in that regard?
Events like this, it's an approach.
Perfect,
Then usually I get the question, which password manager do you use? I use Google in case you want to know. So I don't write my passwords and share them. So So I think like having these kind of meetings where we talk about it, and I think it was something related, like if people really are interested to cybersecurity or want to be protected. I believe that, if you have people in the rooms that come, those that are interested and those that I think you should communicate. And then for the others, I think maybe we need to start from a very young age. Yeah. So having more of this discussion in the classrooms where they are, understanding and getting exposed to digital device, especially when it's a digital device that is connected to a network.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting, isn't it? Because when I think about the University of Auckland, there's not many, or in fact, I don't think there's any companies in New Zealand, for instance, that have as many people coming in every year as what the university would have, right? Thousands of people coming in onto the network. Is that exclusively for the university to ensure that people are up to speed in terms of systems and understanding processes, or is there a role across this panel for you to play, do you think, in that?
Levers in play, I think, is important, and I've seen this mature over time within the New Zealand ecosystem, which is to see cybersecurity not just as the hard technicals. It absolutely is at the core. But in order to scale and get the most impact from your understanding about your operating environment or about security more generally, you have to be able to put your regulatory lever in play. You have to have your policy frameworks. You have to engage the different sectors who have massive influence or massive wads of cash to spend, because those present opportunities that you can't necessarily plan for, but can be an opportunity to introduce uplifts or change the way in which we're doing things that touch a lot of New Zealanders. So I see one of the roles of the National Cybersecurity Centre is to get at some of the problem sets that individual organisations can't be expected to try and rally up and resolve, and in particular around digital supply chain, around international standards. How can we get those settings more favourable to security by design, for instance?
Yeah, great. Before we wrap up today, I want to try something, and I'm going to ask you all to try to be as optimistic as you possibly can.
Good luck.
And I just wonder if each of you could tell us something that you are optimistic about in the coming year in your respective areas of work that you're doing as it relates to cybersecurity. And I might give you a little bit more time to think on this. So we'll start down that end with you, Tim.
Oh, thank you, Tim. So a couple of areas of work. So people may know, and I have a team looking after the policy aspects of cybersecurity. We have a cybersecurity strategy refresh coming up for next year, so very much looking forward to that. And each time it moves ahead significantly. I also have a team looking after critical infrastructure, which cyber sits because it's around all hazards, all threats, and that work is progressing, and that's bringing the system approach to building resilience across cyber, across critical infrastructure. And then, of course, we have the National Security Strategy, so I'm looking forward to further such conversations and continuing these conversations, which are just fantastic to have.
Yeah, great.
So 2024 is looking pretty good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Lisa.
I feel most optimistic when I think about the change over time that I've seen, which I've touched on a couple of times already, and it's that move to multidisciplinary approaches, and it's a move to connecting systems in sectors to get a better outcome. And I see that in particular in the engagement between public and private sector as well. So when I see that kind of work happening and scaling, the impact that individual organisations or sectors can have, that really heartens me, in particular because that's New Zealand's value add. As a small economy, we can do that in a way that is really unique amongst our international partners.
Yeah. What would you say, Amber?
Yeah, one of the things I'm really optimistic about is the conversations that's happening across our members. Our members all compete. The universities compete for students, the research institutions compete with each other and the universities for funding. And they actually leave that at the door and come into a room and talk about how they can work together to strengthen the resiliency of the sector. And that is morphing into discussions we're having at the moment about the future of e-research infrastructure in New Zealand. And the fact that people can just sort of leave one hat at the door and put on a collaborative hat as they come in the room, I think that's really, really positive because we can sort of solve these problems with that attitude.
So I've been trying really hard. And the only thing that comes to my mind is this. With the election, we have a new incoming government that just said they want to cut basically backroom services. So where do you think cybersecurity happens? Yeah. So, but anyway, so...
I asked for optimism here.
Yeah, but that's what is kind of, try to think something positive, right? Yeah, try to something, but, these are the kind of senior that we get all the time. And, well, on a positive note, I believe it's really hard, man. I'm kind of... 15 years of my work has been mainly looking at systems. So it's kind of, access control, stuff like that, where you trust, you only deal with the system. You try to build as efficient or as flexible or can be deployed on mobile phones or whatever. you don't have to deal with the humans. And so basically, when something goes wrong, my first approach, I think most of cybersecurity techies, it's a bloody user. I mean, they don't know, they don't understand what's going on, right? In the last 3 to 5 years, let's say, I've been working more on the human side. And I'm realizing, actually, that our system really sucks really badly. And I think there is much more that we can do. And again, I think the last, the line of defense are the users. And I think if we provide the right level of support, a lot of the issue that we are seeing can be removed. So that's my kind of
So I think we
line.
almost got there to some point
Yeah,
of optimism.
almost. But there are another 5 years to go. I mean, maybe before we get there. Anyway.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Tony, you started today in your keynote by saying that this is something that we need to be doing more of. We need to have more of these conversations. So I hope that this the second Taumata Rau conversation has helped inform a little bit more for you in the audience what some of the key issues are around both national security and cybersecurity. Could you please thank the panel for their time with us this evening?
Thank you.
And I just want to finish by thanking all of you for being here, for your questions. You sent through a lot of questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get through them all, but we look forward to seeing you here at the University of Auckland for the next conversation in this Taumata Rau series. Thanks very much.